Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 146th episode of the Truth Island podcast. In a previous episode, Kenny and I discussed the nature of resentment and some of the harm that can result from harboring resentment for too long. However, another issue that emerged from our discussion was the idea of creating boundaries with other people. On one hand, each of us aspires in becoming the best father, employee, friend, teacher, or simply the best human that they can possibly be. We like to think our love and kindness is infinite, and if we simply negated our own egos, we would be able to achieve boundless wonders in this world. And yet, as most of us come to realize, we as humans do need boundaries, as quite often we are in need of personal alone time in order to recharge our batteries. Conflicting messages in society tell us different things, with articles and books encouraging us to carve out time for ourselves and pursue hobbies and passions which will make us happy. However, this trade off can sometimes come at odds with those who are closest to us, viewing us as being selfish or self centered. Helping me to draw some boundary lines, I am once again joined by Kenny. Kenny, do you think you owe anyone in this world an explanation with how you spend your time?
That question has crossed the line. I'm going to have to draw a boundary there.
Right, this is on the list of do not talk list, right? Of topics we have to avoid.
No, not at all. So it's a yes and a no. I think that there are some certain people you absolutely owe an explanation. Owe them explanations for certain things, whether it's your boss, whether it's your father, your mother, those who have, who are in a position of authority over you, police officers and so forth. You have to explain yourself to them, and that's reasonable. And no one, it's usually the unreasonable person who tries to avoid explaining themselves to people like that. And then there's the rest of the world. There's your mates and your peers and so forth. And I don't think you naturally owe anybody an explanation for the things you do, because it's by all means your life.
Okay, let's talk about those different circles. So friends come and go. There's a lot of people who you have fair weather friends. You go for drinks, but you don't owe anyone. You don't have an obligation to anyone to hang out in a bar or do whatever. Like that's and that comes with the territory. If you don't want to hang out, even if they give you a little bit of a hard time, ultimately there's no obligation. They're not the ones that are paying your bills for you, and that's fair game. I want to talk a little bit about some of the people that are a bit closer to you in life, and that could be your boss, that could be coworkers, that could be your spouse, it could be your kids, it could be any of these people. Because I think even in those areas, there does need to be boundaries. And like, on one hand, there are when you've engaged, when you have a boss or something, there is, and let's start with the workplace first, and then we'll make our way to the family, right?
Okay.
So here in America, we have this idea in our head, right? That like
Mhm.
boss is the boss man. He is the boss man. He controls me. As long as I'm under his watch, I am his faithful servant or whatever. However, what I like about France is that they have a rule there that says it's illegal for a boss to contact you after 5 o'clock. So you come to work, you do your thing, but then after 5 o'clock, you leave. Laptops shut down. They can't email you. They can't call you. They can't tell you to come back. They can't tell you to log on from your computer at home. And I kind of like that. And again, I'm obviously biased because I've been a worker for the most of my life, not a boss man. But I think that those kind of things are fair to ask. If someone's paying me for the hour, okay, well then my body belongs to that person for the hour, right? Like that my mind and my body belongs to that person if they're paying me for the hour. However, I think even, I think we have not at least a lot of people my age or so don't have a work-life balance. So what do you say when it comes to the sphere of work?
Well, the idea of the boss not contacting you after 5 o'clock sounds like a brilliant idea. Because first of all, I think that there are situations and many situations where, when you work for someone, they think they own you on and off the clock. They think simply because they pay your, give you a paycheck, pay your wages, that it's that you're theirs and that, you can't really do anything about it. And often you can't, because you know that the hassle of saying no is either going to create a very uncomfortable, often not all the time, create a very uncomfortable workspace or get you fired, right? And so people who don't have that privilege are, it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. So those who have, anxieties over work, it's usually, I would say that it's a lot of young people, because if there's this stigma of being young and not working. I think it is important. It is important to establish some sort of balance between work and personal life, especially if it's especially if it's something that that affects your life in a big way. If you have kids, you want to spend time with them and your wife and your friends and so forth. You can't be distracted by work at certain points, at certain points in your life, in your everyday life, and it's really tricky. This is one of those places where it's got to be tailored to the individual, to their personal situation, because it's not a blanket fix here for everyone, because some people, their workplace actually does need them, and some people do, they don't mind putting in an extra hour for the boss or for whoever it may be at the work, while others, it really bothers them, but they really can't say jack squat about it because they're terrified, or either they're cowards, or they're just really they're certain or concerned about the implications of that in the workplace.
I think you struck upon something that needs further explanation, and that is your upfront agreements with your employer. And I think it goes as follows. If you accept a job that pays like a normal lower middle class or middle class salary, 40K, 50K, 60K, whatever it is, and the boss man says, your hours are from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 4, whatever it is, and you're earning just a regular working class salary, that's an agreement, right? That's like a contract. That's a covenant. That's a contract between you, the employee, and the employer. Now, if you're a high paid lawyer and they tell you at the job interview up front, listen, we are paying you $400,000 a year, but we own you. And if we call you at midnight, you got to pick up the phone, end of story. Then that's another type of arrangement, because from up front, they are paying you a devilish handsome salary of $400,000 a year or whatever. And if they tell you that they own you and that they have the right to call you at 1 a.m., you're signing up for that. Where I think it becomes a problem is when you have a lot of normal folk who are just earning regular normal folk incomes, and they're being signed up for the grand tour. They're being signed up for the 1 a.m. emails and all this other stuff. And that's where I think upfront bargaining kind of has to come into play, because I think that if you sign up for something, you take the risks and you take the responsibilities that come with that. It becomes problematic where they tell you one thing and they pay you for one thing, but then they expect something totally different.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that, and that happens a lot in the workplace. Often you get a job thinking that you're going to be an accountant, and yeah, sure, you're an accountant, but you're also the secretary. Or you get a job thinking you're going to be a janitor, and you find that you're not just doing the janitorial work, but you're also doing the laundry. And it takes about maybe a month or two before they spring it on you, and by then you're in it. You can't really do jack squat about it, because the hassle of looking for a new job is a hassle, and we don't like being hassled as human beings. We do like our comfort, and so upfront bargaining is, I mean, it's important. Not everybody can do it, and not every job opportunity allows it. But most of the time, the average citizen is simply just trying to get a job, maintain the job, and die, because they don't really want to, nobody wants to go through the rigmarole of the stressful situation of either challenging the system or leaving the system and having to look for a different system that suits you better, because it's really difficult. But for those who can bargain, for those who have the capacity, absolutely. And a person who takes a $400,000 job, knowing fully well what it costs, signing your soul away to the devil, absolutely. They signed that paper. It's like, yep, it's written. You signed it in blood. It's right there. You can see it. Yeah, you got to uphold your end of the contract.
One lawyer sold for $400,000 coming up.
Going twice, sold. And I think it's sure, if you can handle it, take it, please, absolutely. And if you can bargain, absolutely, please bargain. Yes.
So Another thing that kind of seeps into this picture is this idea of guilt. And what I notice is that sometimes employers are very good at fostering guilt in the workplace, and they're not necessarily the ones that bring about that guilt. They kind of bring about that guilt through your fellow coworkers or your teammates, so to speak. So if you're there in an office setting, or you're just sitting there and it's like 5 o'clock and everyone sees you getting up, chances are it's not even your boss that's giving you those funny looks. It's your like, oh well, this guy thinks he's special. He thinks he can just get up and leave there. And I think that is an example of a boundary. I think that's a boundary right there, because the only question that really needs to be asked, if someone gets out of their seat at 5 o'clock, which they have every right to do, there's only one question that should be asked. And that question is, did that person do their job? That's the only question that really matters. It doesn't matter whether they did it in 3 hours or whether they did it in 4 hours or 5 hours. Did they do their job? And if you can answer yes, it doesn't matter if they decide to leave at 5 o'clock. And I think that our generation has that problem, just solidifying that boundary. And I think you said this earlier. It takes bravery. It takes bravery to kind of establish that boundary, because you're not only talking back to a boss, you're probably talking back to several of your coworkers as well, and you have to explain and you have to overcome that guilt, because everyone is going to come at you and be like, well, I stayed late yesterday. And I'm like, great. Who told you to stay late? Oh, you chose to stay late. That's you, buddy. You chose to stay late, right? And that takes bravery and it takes courage, because it takes courage to stand up to multiple people. So, any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, I think courage, well, I don't know how a person can be taught courage, but it's important. One of the things about guilt is, guilt is, when you've done something actually wrong and you're objectively guilty. You've done something that even you deem to be unacceptable, in the sense that even if a person, even if nobody was there to see you commit the whatever it is you did, your conscience tells you you've done porked up, right? Shame is a different story. Shame, it has to do more with the perception of others about our situation, our actions, our words, and whatever it may be. So shame has very little to do with what's actual, but conceptual. And so what you find is those in the workplace experiencing peer pressure and shame and things like that will just knock it off, because it makes literally zero sense, in the sense of when those coworkers, they're not with you, they're not a part of your life, bro.
And they're
you
not
know
your friend either.
they're
Yeah.
not your friend. They don't care about you. And you certainly, except for if you have good coworkers and you guys seem to click well, then it'd be weird if they make you feel ashamed for going home when your work is done. It's just, what I mean. Like, so I think that it's important to get rid of that shame. It's important to get rid of, and it comes with an understanding. It comes with understanding, in the sense of you got to understand. Okay, what's the nature of work? What's the nature of the relationship between an employer and employee? What's the nature of the relationship between employee and coworkers? And if you can solidify these things for yourself as it actually is, I think you'll be okay. But on the surface, I'm going to say that the shame is completely useless, but it is a very brilliant tactical method to get people not only working hard but also working against each other, which is interesting for a workplace.
What's very interesting is that we're obviously a capitalist society here, but a lot of these techniques that are used in workplaces actually come from communism, which I actually find very ironic, because in communism there's no I, there's a we. And people under Stalin and under Mao and many of these communist leaders, they were forced to work in something called collective farming, right? And it didn't matter if you were done farming for the day. It's like the whole village would guilt you into continue farming or to continue giving up your share of crops and so forth. So this idea of collective shame or collective guilt, it's really funny because it actually originates within communist societies, but now I kind of seeing it being played out in the capitalist world. And I think what all communist societies try and do is they try and corrode the inner voice. Each of us has an inner voice that tells us if we're in the right or if we're in the wrong. So if a kid steals a candy bar from a store, there's an inner voice that is in that kid that says you have done wrong, and it's
Yeah.
undeniable, right? But I think that in some of these situations, what they try and do is they try and corrode your inner voice of like, am I in the right? Am I in the wrong? Did I do my best work? Did I try hard? Did I do my job? They try and corrode that inner voice within you that tells you the difference between right and wrong, or shame and no shame. And I find something very dangerous about that, because that inner voice is what gives us boundaries to say no.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also anybody who controls or speaks for that inner voice is basically your God, is the person who controls you. And so if you know if the boss is manipulating you, there's one of the only ways you can there are only two ways to get control of another human being is through force, at least physical force. So there's physical force, sorry, there's only one way is force, but it's physical force or emotional force, so manipulation. So you manipulate them through violence of the body or manipulate them through violence of the mind. And that, if you can do it and do it successfully, yeah, you have a bunch of well-rounded cattle working for you, and you can sway them however you please. And God forbid one of them actually starts thinking for themselves, then all hell breaks loose, and they're the ones that usually starts being attacked um, or not well appreciated or advanced in the workplace.
One last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the family. This is something that I am a sentimental guy. As much as I speak about, like, hey, I'm getting out of here, it's 5 o'clock. There is a part of me also, though, that is somewhat of a sentimental guy. And if I see, like, one of my brothers or someone that I respect really sweating by his brow, I do feel compelled to help that person. Like, there is genuine guilt if I do see everyone else working really hard, and deservedly so, not because they were coerced or tricked, or because they have inflated egos and think that they're all that important. But if I see someone working hard, I do have that feeling of like, I am leaving behind fellow human beings. I think people in the military feel that quite a lot. They feel like, you hear from like servicemen, like even when they're on
Mm.
their vacation, or they're, at home, they feel guilty, like, oh my goodness, I'm not out there with my brothers right now, even though I deserve this time off. I've been allotted this time off. I feel bad. How should one deal with genuine guilt of like watching other people working hard and you're just not partaking in it? Like, do you give any air to that voice, or is that voice just another form of trickery within yourself?
Well, it could be, but it's a yes and a no, because or yes or no, excuse me, because if you're, let's just say that you're working, it's crunch hour, and the company's going through such a situation where they need all the hands they can get, and some unforeseen situation had been sprung upon them, and there really isn't much time to get things done, right? Legally and contractually, you're allowed to leave at 5 o'clock. That's perfectly fine. And if you did it, no one would fault you, hopefully, but usually they do. But let's just say we're living in an ideal world. Legally, if you could leave at 5, you'd leave at 5. But if you're about to get up and you see your mates working about, and you're wondering, should I go? And if you think to yourself, you know what, I want to stay here and help, because that that's what I want to do. I just think is the right thing to do.
And sometimes when your mate is silent, right? Like when your mate is trying to shame you into staying, then you actually are more inclined to leave. But when your mate is like silently working and then you leave, then you actually feel even worse.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, it's human nature, right? Because we are our biggest critics. We don't, at least some of us are. I don't know if that's true anymore, but usually we're usually our biggest critics. No one is harder on ourselves than we are on ourselves. And so the silence, whether he's intentionally being silent or just focused on his work, often, yeah, we tend to go back and forth with ourselves. And but here's the thing: if you do that simply because you want to do it, it's your choice. It wasn't because anybody forced you to do, which makes it a good thing, which makes it an act of kindness, and an act of camaraderie. It makes it it makes it makes you a solid being. You know what I mean? But if you're coerced into doing it, manipulated or violently forced into doing it, then it's not really a good thing. It's not really your choice. You're just there like a robot doing what they have been, what you've been assigned to do. But here, people don't know this, but it's actually pretty impressive what workers would be willing to do for their companies if they were shown a great deal of care. You know what I mean? We feign care all the time. We pretend in our commercials. We always say we care about our employees. We are like a family here. But the truth is, they don't give a crap about you. Hell, they don't even know your name. You know what I mean? You leave today, Joe Schmo takes your place tomorrow. And so you're just another cog in a wheel. But if companies actually genuinely, which is I do not think it's possible. I'm going to say this outright right now, it's not possible. But if it were the case, if for by some weird turn of events, maybe I don't know, hell froze over. So the idea is that if companies actually cared for the employees, believe it or not, I believe that a lot of these, a lot of employees, though some would take advantage of it, a lot would be very loyal to the company and would work hard for the company because human beings we're very tribal. And when we believe that we are part of something, we work hard for the progress of that thing. But that's just an ideal world.
I agree, because when someone, and one of our future episodes I think we're going to discuss is, are humans good or evil? But I actually think that's a very good case to make about how we have inherent goodness within us, because we know when somebody is legitimately deserving of help or legitimately is legitimately suffering, right? And I think that's a great example. Let's say you're working at a company and there's an unforeseen problem with a client, or it's tax season, and you
Yeah,
decide to stay late because it's tax season. And I have a lot of friends that are accountants, and they are complete ghosts through the month of April, when all the taxes are being done. But here's the thing, and this is the caveat that I'm going to throw into this. If you decide to stay late, or your employer asks you to stay late because there's a special project or it's tax season, fine, good and dandy. Assuming you're a normal, like 60K a year, regular average Joe person. But here's the caveat to this. You need to call them out on it later on, right? You have to tell them, like, hey, you know how, like, for those 2 weeks in April, I was here until 9 o'clock? Well, I'm going to be leaving early now in May or in June or whenever it is, right? Because there has to be that trade-off of, like, there's a time for sacrifice. There's a time for extraordinary circumstance. There's always extraordinary circumstance, and that's an opportunity for us to be extraordinary human beings. But the time for being extraordinary is not every day of the year. It's just not. You're not
no,
every day is an extraordinary day. And I think if you're going to step up to the plate, you need to take note of it, and you need to be willing to kind of throw that back
yeah,
against your employer or your coworkers, and being like, hey, I did my thing when you really needed me. I was there. I was a team player. But
yeah.
today is just a Tuesday. Today is just a regular Tuesday, and I'm out of here. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a certain amount of understanding to do that. But yeah,
I think look, if you're the only dude that's doing this, it's awkward. It's awkward as hell. But I think that our generation needs to kind of learn this. I think earlier generations, that were unionized or whatever, they kind of knew this already, and somehow our generation just forgot about this or unlearned it or whatever. But we need to start relearning this, and just
yeah,
learn. Basically, it's called learning to be an adult and speaking up for yourself. If I put it so simply. Okay, let's go ahead and transition to boundaries with loved ones and family and so forth, right? And you're gonna hear this, like, Aaron, you're being selfish right now. You need to spend more time doing this with me, right? And look, if you're married to somebody or in a committed relationship, you're not a single dude anymore. You're not an independent dude anymore. I hate to break it to you. You're in a relationship, and that's going to
yeah.
require sacrifice. I'm wondering how it is that you create boundaries, because as much as it's true that you're no longer a single entity, I do believe that relationships do function very nicely when each person in that relationship has their alone time and has that special place in the apartment, or if you're lucky enough to have separate rooms, has their own room to kind of really do what they like to do and sort of live in their worlds and pursue the hobbies and passions, and maybe even pursue the friends or whatever other things that they do. And then I think it's very romantic and very beautiful and very functional if they do their separate things and then they come back together and they live their independent lives, but then they unify at the end of the day and talk to each other about what happened. I think there's something very beautiful about that, instead of them just being like tied at the hip, texting each other every 5 seconds when they're separated at work. What say you?
Well, I didn't say this earlier, but when it comes to, because we're moving into, a much more dicey area and more sensitive, I believe,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to say it now. I think that the ideal place to be in life is not one who sets boundaries. I think that the ideal place to be in life is one without boundaries whatsoever, in the sense of, and now when I say that, everybody wants to, get naked and jump into the neighbor's pool. That's not what I'm talking about at all. No. So, because that, but what I'm talking about is a person's whose being, whose heart, whose person is, ready to adapt and ready to joyfully, and without even noticing it, joyfully adapt to his or own surroundings. So, so when it comes to family or even work, when we can circle back to that too. But when it comes to family specifically, having boundaries is not a bad thing. I always give my friends crack for it, but secretly I know it's not a bad thing. But because I believe there's a better place to be, and that's what I described as a person who is adaptable and who is joyfully adaptable in whatever circumstance they may be in. But when we're dealing with boundaries with family, yeah, it's if you need it, then you need it. It's important to have that time where you're not being disturbed, hassled, bothered, where you can go and get the weight of the world off of your shoulders, whether it's be with your mates, cigar, scotch, whatever it may be, video games, sitting down, think, writing, drawing, whatever it is, name it, pick it, it's your thing. So I think it's important, and I think you're right. There is something nice about having a little bit of a different experience in a day, and then coming together and chatting about it, or not chatting about it. But yes, coming together at the end of the day, and at least no more weight on the shoulders.
I first off, I love that expression. What did you call it? Like joyful adaptation? Is that what you said earlier?
Oh, joyful adaptation, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful phrase. Okay, I'm gonna pick your mind on joyful adaptation and how that works. It sounds almost Darwinian. It's like you're
Yeah.
joyfully adapting to this new person in your life and the things that they want to do. Okay,
Okay.
so let's go over an example of joyful adaptation. Okay, so sometimes my girlfriend likes to go shopping, as a lot of people's girlfriends like to do, and
Yeah.
I hate shopping. I'm just gonna just absolutely hate it, right?
I'm right there with you, brother.
I
Same story, man. I mean, for a guy, for me, I walk in, I walk out. I walk in, I know exactly what I'm looking for.
Thank
I
you.
grab it,
Thank you.
and I'm done. I don't even have to try it on sometimes. You know what I mean? I just grab it and I go.
I was telling somebody earlier that IKEA makes you walk through every other section, right? You go to the
Yeah,
IKEA, you have to go through the kitchen section, you have to go through this. It's like I really just want this one thing, but then
I
you
just want
get
hands.
yeah, you get lost in the maze, and all these other things are screaming at you or screaming at your significant other, and it's all just like an elaborate ploy to distract you and so forth. But I hate shopping. Just in general, I hate it. So my question is this: sometimes it's helpful to have an extra person around when you're going shopping, and I get that, right? And I do the driving and all this other stuff. So I want to ask you, since I despise shopping, what is the right thing to do in that situation? To say, sweetheart, I'm going to sit this one out. I'm going to stay home. Or do I joyfully adapt to going to the shopping mall?
Okay, if you need to quote unquote joyfully adapt, don't. Because don't. Because it's like the person is saying, I'm being patient with you. Well, the very fact that you mentioned you're being patient with me indicates you're not patient with me at all. So it's one of those things where if you notice you're doing it or you're trying to do it, don't do it. Because a joyful person who just naturally or joyfully adapts to the situation doesn't think about it, just kind of go, oh. It's like a friend of mine describes says why drunk drivers I think it's drunk drivers often survive the collisions. And it's strange because it's almost as though because you're so lubricated, they just kind of go with the flow. It's like out the windshield, okay, and he just out the windshield he goes, and he's happy as a clam. The point is simply, it's kind of like that. You don't think too much about it. It's kind of like, it's kind of like the Tao in the sense of it is what it is. The flow is the flow. If you but the idea is simply that if you pay too much attention to being joyful, it's like someone telling you, relax. Well, I can't relax now. I just want to just relax, help me out here, buddy. So it's one of those things that if you find yourself wanting to be joyful, wanting to adopt, wanting to go for the sake of that kind of feeling, don't do it. Stay home and do something else.
Okay, but now we're in a little bit of a pickle here because
Talk to me.
let's say that you need to because on one hand, you said that the goal is to be kind of boundless, right? Like there's a boundlessness that's kind of bringing these two people together. And perhaps there's things that your significant other wants to share with you that you don't necessarily want to partake in, but it's significant to them, right? It's significant to them,
Absolutely.
and but it's not significant to you, because now you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand you recognize how significant it is to the other person, so you have the option of falsely joyfully adapting, right? Like, okay, I don't really want to do this, but I see it's important to you, so I'm gonna joyfully adapt to what it is that we're doing. But then if you don't joyfully adapt and you just say, no, I'm going to sit here and just play video games all day, or I'm going to watch TV, well,
Yeah.
then you're going to be accused of being selfish. So if you don't,
Okay.
if you don't fake it,
Mhm. Yep.
then you're accused of being selfish. But then
Yep.
if you are faking it, you're faking it. So what
Yeah. Yeah, well, I love that situation because it's just clearly human. We're so beautiful, we're so incredibly like big dumb animals. So it's like, and it's so lovable because here's the thing. There's certain situations that it's very hard to defend yourself. Okay, um, when someone calls you selfish, it's a very hard thing to say I'm not selfish, unless of course you are. I mean, you're just gifted with some sort of just smack down right there with a just brilliant retort. I don't know how to help you, buddy. But usually people have this weird, what do you mean I'm selfish? I'm not selfish. And they just go back and forth. I'm not selfish. Yes, you are. I'm not selfish. Yes, you are. Okay. It's hard to defend yourself from being selfish. And that's why people often use, you're selfish. Um, but there are a lot of people who are in fact selfish, and here's the thing, that's wrong. Every human being is selfish. I'm sorry about that. Every human being is selfish. The question is, how selfish are you? Are you selfish in ingredients of, are you always thinking about yourself? Is that really how bad it is that you've never thought one day, one dime about somebody else, their needs, their suffering, their hurts? Have you never stepped out of your own comfort, your own way to help somebody else? Because there are people who are absolutely like that. They will hurt you for a penny. And there are those who, yeah, I mean, they just want to do what they want to do when they want to do it. And sure, most of the week, or where, I don't know, most of the week they selflessly help others however they can. But when it comes to their stuff, like their time, they will cut you for their time. You know what I mean? So the accusation is often true. And so, and we often feel the prick because it's like one of those things people tell you, is it, if a person doesn't want to be selfish, right? And they've been working at it, let's just say for a couple of years now. And you say, well, are you selfless enough? Who in your right mind is going to say, yes, I am selfless enough? Like, what kind of answer is that? There is no answer to that. The only answer to that, the only socially acceptable, even to the person who's answering, the only decent answer is either I doubt it, I don't know, or hell no. You know what I mean? Like, there is, so it's one of those places where the human is trapped. So when it comes to being selfish, it's you that has to determine whether or not you're selfish. You have to do it. No one else can tell you whether or not you're selfish. You've got to deal. If they tell you, you've got to deal with it. You've got to understand, is it true, whether it's true or not? Because ultimately, it's you that determines whether you are in fact selfish or not. And you got to be honest with yourself. If you lie to yourself, well, good to you. Not only are you selfish, you're also insane. So it's like, you got to tell yourself the truth. Are you selfish? Consider it, And if I was saying, when you finally know yourself, when someone says, you're selfish, like, not really. Not really. I mean, I'm just doing this thing right now because I want to do it. It has nothing to do with, me not wanting to let you have your way, but I just simply want to do it, So I think honesty is one of those things that really does counter those situations. But being accused of being selfish is a very difficult situation to get out of. Unless you're James Bond.
James Selfless.
James Bond. Shaken.
Okay, so let's see if we can let's help our fella here who's sitting on the couch now, and he's got a big decision to make here.
Yeah.
He goes to the boring shopping mall, and he hates himself for it. He's bored. He's looking at his phone. He's like, come on, how many times are we going to look at that pillow over there? Let's get out of here, right? So we got our fella. He can choose the quote unquote the selfless road, but he's but he's gonna end up being angry with himself and bored and frustrated, and he's not going to be in the happiest of places. However, if he chooses the sitting on the couch playing his video game road, then there's going to be an internal guilt that creeps into him, like, man, maybe there's some heavy stuff that they're lifting, maybe they need a nice strong strapping man to be there and help them move this from the car and do this and that, right? So it's one of these situations where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. I guess the question that you have to ask yourself is, if I sit on this couch, I got to be honest with myself and say, I am being selfish right now. Can I live with me being selfish right now? Is like the question that every man or woman must actually confront themselves with.
So there's a musician named Andy Mineo. He's one of my favorite rappers. He says something like this. He gives a line, says, you got two choices. Both require pain. One's the pain of change and the pain of staying the same. So the idea is simply this. In that situation, that's exactly what you're going through. Is you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, but one damning is actually for your good and the other damning is not for your good. So there is the person who does, the person who does go does not like it. They just don't like it. And the whole time you're thinking, man, I could be playing video games. I could be playing video games. I could be reading a book. I could be watching a movie, whatever it may be, right? And the other lad who doesn't go, and this is obviously just an example. I know that people's minds and hearts work in very different and complex ways, but this is something simple just to give an idea of something. Send a message across. So the other lad chooses not to go, right? And he's playing the game or reading the book or whatever, but he or she keeps thinking, yeah, I should have gone. I could have gone, like, what if this, what if that? And you find that the one who went, in spite of not actually wanting to go, doesn't change for the better at all. because they forced themselves to do something that was contrary to their nature. Their nature did not naturally change. And that's often what we try to do. We try to force change into our lives. And we don't know that often it's until we get what we want. That's why, listen, that's why it's often the millionaires who tell you money isn't everything. They're bastards for saying it, but it's true. It's true, you know?
So
But
like the movies, right? When we watch movies, right? The movies always make it seem like you have a reluctant hero, right? The reluctant hero. So our guy sitting on the couch right now is a reluctant hero. And the movies will trick you into thinking, well, if that guy gets off the couch and just does the right thing and goes to the shopping mall with his wife, something magical will just happen there. And then the guy will be like, aha, I've seen the error of my ways. And now we had this joyous, wonderful time together, right? But it's not, it's seldom like that. It's like you will do that thing, you will go to that shopping mall, and then you'll just be glad to come home or whatever. And I think that we need to kind of remove that from our psyche, because we're expecting a feel good, like, fairy tale ending if we do the right thing. It doesn't always work out that way.
it often doesn't work that way. So most of the time when you do the right thing, you get hurt. The right way is filled with pain. Listen, even the Christ said this, said, narrow, straight and narrow is the gate that leads to salvation. Like it's a tight road. It's not an easy road. It's a very tight road. And so the idea that, doing the right thing turns into this wonderful magical adventure is, sometimes it's true. Don't get me wrong, but that's just sometimes. Most of the times, you're going to get your nuts kicked in, and it's going to hurt like the Dickens, and you're going to think to yourself, but I did the right thing. I didn't know the old, I was trying to help her. I was trying to help the old lady across the street. Little did I know she was a, 12th degree black belt. Thought I was going to mug her and kick my ass. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the point is simply, often, not all the time, but often, doing the right thing hurts. But there is something else that arises from doing the right thing that no one talks about. We often talk about self-confidence, and we think self-confidence is mustered up by looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself you're a good chap. It's not. I don't care how many times you say it, it's not going to work that way. Self-confidence arises when you become a person that you respect. And that happens when you make more right decisions than wrong, especially in the midst of adversity. So when you stand up for someone else, you're the only one who goes home with a good feel. Even if the situation went to shit, you go home with a feeling like, holy crap, I'm that kind of guy. I didn't know that about myself. Or I'm that kind of gal. I didn't know that about myself. Like I like myself right now. I'm the kind of person, I didn't know this, but I'm the kind of person who would do this naturally. I didn't know that. I'm the kind of person who would make this difficult decision, who would make a right decision in a very difficult situation. Nobody knows that those things build you up. That when you look in yourself in the mirror, you don't see a kid anymore. You see a full-grown adult, and not just an adult. You see an adult you're proud of. One of the reasons we don't have self-confidence, especially young people, is because we keep making bad decisions and we have to live with them. We look at ourselves in the mirror and we're not proud of who we are. We're ashamed of ourselves deep down inside. Hello? Yes, of course you're ashamed of yourself. You're living like an animal. You know what I mean? And so often the decisions we make really do reinforce the kind of person we are, and the kind of person we become either makes us confident and strong or makes us weak and ashamed.
Wow. Let me just say that I think you have laid on some serious truth on like like that's like a number 10 here on Truth Island. We talk about a lot of truth, but that's like a 10 or 11 up there in the sky, man. I completely agree with that. And I love the analogy that you just used, because no matter how much weights you lift, no matter how much hair gel you put in your hair, or whatever it is that your fancy clothes or whatever it is, if you are not living your life as a good, positive human being, you will loathe yourself. It doesn't matter how handsome you are. It doesn't matter how rich you are. It doesn't matter what it is. You will not like the person that's staring you back
You
in
won't
the
like it at
mirror.
all.
And I think, honestly, you're one of the few people that probably lay down the truth like that so hard and so clean. So I thank you for that. So bottom line, you would definitely tell that lazy guy on the couch, like, hey, buddy, put down the video game controllers. It's time to help your wife and go shopping.
No, I'll tell him to keep playing because he
Really?
has
Okay, I thought that was the opposite. Okay, go ahead,
because
please.
he has to come to that decision by himself.
Okay.
If I influence that decision, it's not his decision, it's me.
Okay, I see.
You know.
But
So if
you believe
yeah,
internally the
yeah,
correct decision for him is to get off the couch and go help his wife. No one should tell him. No one can tell him that, but internally he needs to arrive at that level himself.
yes,
Okay, gotcha. Okay, okay.
yeah.
I was like thinking to myself, did he just like completely do a 180 now and then just throw all of that juicy truth away in the trash can? Okay, good, 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 good.
Here's a fine turkey. Now watch me put it in the trash.
No, and then what it's important. No, I actually like that you made that distinction because let's say his wife gets under his hood, right? And let's say, you just sit there and you play your video games. Well, now if you're starting to shame and guilt your husband like
Yeah,
that, he's going to double down in his bad behavior, right? The more you prod and the more you coax, the more you push him to get off the couch, he's like, no, you're trying to, this is my one day off this week and now you're trying to ruin my life, right? And
yeah,
like he's just going to double down in his behavior.
yeah.
Whereas if you just say, okay, sweetie, I guess I'm gonna have to go to the store alone, all alone, and lift this. There's gonna be some heavy growth. I'll be okay. I'll be okay, right?
Yeah.
That now, like obviously not that overt and not that manipulative, but you can actually draw at the man's heartstrings, right? And you can hopefully through your silence, you can make him feel guilty and make him do the right. Well,
But
you
here's the
you
thing.
make him come to the right decision by not saying anything. Yes, yeah.
So I heard the story. A friend of mine told me the story a couple years ago. He reiterated it a couple months ago. Um, so there was this family whose wife had been complaining that her husband doesn't go to church with them. Right? She really wants them to go to church, and I'm like thinking, okay, great story, bro. It's like, wait a minute. So he says, okay, so the wife's been complaining and nagging for a long time, trying to get this guy to church. Sometimes he'd go, but he'd be miserable and he just wants to come out whenever he could, come out, have a cigarette, he was thinking about the game. He wasn't there at all. So eventually he just stopped going, no matter what she did or said. He just stayed at home, smoked cigarettes, drank beer and watched the game. And the kids would it's like that Norman Rockwell, beautiful Norman Rockwell painting where the family's off to church, the father's sitting down smoking, and the kids are looking at him with disgust, and the family.
That's America today for sure. Yep.
And so this friend, this woman finally talked to someone about it. A very wise guy, very wise guy. The guy told her, "Listen, mate, if you don't know anything about guys, is that okay? That's not how you get him to do this. All right. So here's what you're gonna do. Okay. First, you have to forget about the church thing. If it's not gonna happen, it's not gonna happen. You can't kill him. You know what I mean? You can. That's just pretty. If it's that important, sure, I guess. But so see, you forget about the church thing. Just if you can help him out on Sundays to just feel at home when you're leaving. If you can do that, let's see what happens, right? So he's sitting down there Sunday again. He's ready for this battle that usually happens in the mornings before he eventually decides he's not going to win, nor is he going to lose. He's going to be indifferent and sit down and smoke and drink and watch his game. And she says to him, she says, okay, I'm going off to church with the kids. And he says, okay, he's surprised, no yelling. And she says, can I buy you a pack of cigarettes?
It's like, oh, wow, yeah.
What do you mean? It's like, yeah, I noticed that, you're almost out. Can I, quickly get you a pack of cigarettes before I head out? It's like, yeah, sure. That sounds pretty good, actually. And this happened. This continued for a while. until this guy's like, holy crack, my wife is amazing. And she's because she's amazing, I want to do something. I just want to be with her. I want to do something. I want to do something that I know she'll want me to do.
Ah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
So
yeah.
he made a decision for himself, by her strength. There's a strength of women that people don't understand. People think that women are weak. Physically, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Like, what about Ronda Rousey? That's one chick, one woman. Okay, calm down. But women are strong in another kind of way, brilliantly strong. By her strength, this guy made a something changed in him. There was a strength in him. Men borrow strength for women. There's a certain kind of strength that we pull from them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
An internal strength. A woman can deal. I mean, they make the best spies. A woman can deal with a lot of stress. There's a kind of stress that a woman can deal with that a guy will just not be able to deal with as adequately as she would. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And so we pull strengths from our wives and from our significant others. So often, I think that what we don't know, or what we misunderstand, is it's not about making sure people don't do what they want to do and you forcing them to do what you want them to do. But often, it's simply about allowing them to do what they want to do and making them comfortable, or should I say, making it, how you say, as
It's like too
and
comfortable.
yeah, but it gets weird because there are dark situations in this world. They're like,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
this is not tailored to, this is not like a blanket statement. You know what I mean? This is tailored to certain individuals in certain situations. But the human heart operates in a sense, I don't know why, but we tend to rise to the occasion for those we love. We don't, no husband in his right mind rises to occasion for the nagging wife. It just doesn't happen. He's like, I'm just gonna crawl into the roof and I'm gonna sleep there until she's dead. You know?
It's like there's no guy that ever says, sweetheart, on the 30th time you asked me, my heart just changed, right?
my heart. Yeah, I did. It's called a heart attack. you know, but there is no man in this world, no man, unless he's just not. I don't want to say too much. I just say he's just not there. But many men, especially American men, there are very few American men who will not rise to the occasion for the ones they love. I've not seen it. It's like it's part of the American myth.
Hmm.
It's part of the American myth. It's part of the American mind that men rise to the occasion for the ones they love. All your films about protecting the ones we love. It's so superficial in the movies because they think they operate in a very fantastic world, but in real life, it's the same thing.
So I think you're onto something here, and I love that story you just told, because I think what it strikes at is it does strike a little bit at the relationship that we have with our ego, and here's how it plays out.
Yeah.
If every man out there loves to play the knight to help the damsel in distress, but ma'am, can I help you with that? We like in New York City, if a lady is trying to struggle to get her shopping cart or whatever up the stairs, ma'am, can I help you out? All of us guys, we love doing that kind of stuff. We
Yeah, we
love,
do.
we love, we love it, love it. However, when we're being told to do it, suddenly the dynamics change because now that person has become like an oppressor, or that person has become like a master over you. And
Yeah.
now, and see, because the male mind is a funny thing because we are trained to fight oppression, but at the same time we're also trained to protect innocence. So we have these two dichotomies going on here where it's like our mind is telling us protect the damsel in distress, protect innocence, protect the weak, protect the helpless. But then if someone starts opening their mouth and bossing you around, that innocent person, even though they may very well be innocent, because they open their mouth and they're forcing you to do this, now all of a sudden you're viewing them as being like an oppressor, and now you're responding accordingly. So I think you're right. I think a lot of women should know that about us guys, that like we do, like deep down inside we want to do the right thing, but you have to talk to us in a funny way in order to get it to work.
Guys are so strange, we just don't get it. But often, under the right circumstances, we rise to the occasion, we do the right thing. You know, I think that we can, if we, yeah, I think we're often out of our depths, but we try. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Um, so the last thing I kind of want to talk about here with this family dynamic is how do you think, like, I want to go back to what I originally said, and I think there are those moments in life where you need to go to the grocery store, you need to go to the shopping mall, you need to help your wife with whatever it is that she needs help with, and I absolutely agree with you. And you won't feel good while you're at the shopping mall. You may not even feel good later that day, but you
Yeah.
will, like, over the course of months and years, you will feel good about yourself as a human being. You'll be like, I'm a man of integrity, I'm a man of honor, and I do what's needed of me. And you'll look yourself in the mirror and be more proud of yourself than any six pack or whatever it could give you. And I fundamentally agree with that. That's a really good point. I do think, though, that when it comes to boundaries, right? If people are a little bit too much on top of each other. Now, if you hear me out on this, if you have someone in your life and you're constantly texting each other throughout the day or whatever, oh, guess what happened, minute, 5:51, oh, this happened 5:52, 5:53, 5:54, right? Like, if you're just constantly on top of each other, I don't think that that's necessarily healthy, because I think that in order to sustain balance in any type of relationship, you
Yes.
need, kids are lovely. I don't have kids, but I have a feeling that they kind of know how to escape into their own little worlds. They want to go play their Pokemon, or they want to go talk with their friends, whatever. Kids can
Yeah,
kind of,
I believe so.
yeah, you don't need to worry as much with them. But I think with significant others and girlfriends and wives, it's like, I do think that a few hours each day that you're apart, and it goes back to the old adage, distance makes the heart grow fonder. There is some truth in that, because now you can kind of regroup and be like, oh, you're never going to believe what happened to me over here, or sweetheart, look what I built over here, or oh, I read a really interesting thing the other day. Like, I feel like when you properly cultivate each other, when you properly cultivate yourself as an individual, and then you sort of regroup in that formation, it actually makes the relationship stronger, because you each have your unique hobbies, passions, interests, and experiences. Like, if you have those unique experiences, you can actually reflect with somebody who's your partner in life and talk about those things. Whereas if it's play by play, it's like you can't vicariously live someone else's life. You're either there at work with me or you're not. And I think
Yes.
I think a lot of people kind of diminish the value of quality time together by speaking a little bit too much on the phone or too much text messaging. I think it's really healthy for that, like, that nice separation throughout the day, and then that coming together, because you also have completed stories. Because if you're creating anxiety on the other person, because if you're constantly giving them play by play, what happens, you got to tell me, blah, blah. Whereas maybe it's just better, I deal with this on my own, and then I come home and then I tell you how I dealt with it, and now it's a nice, crisp story. Whereas if you're constantly connecting with someone through text messages, every second is a freaking cliffhanger, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I mean, there's when it's important that people have their own lives, separate lives, especially before they get married, and especially before they even start dating, because you don't want to get absorbed into the other person's life, and then people start talking about what's it called, um, codependency, and um, um, an obsession, perhaps even with the other, and so forth, and clingy. The word often used. She's very clingy, or he's very clingy.
Oh
Well,
yeah,
that's
clingy.
simply because the person doesn't have their own life.
There's also a lot of clingy guys out there, by
Yeah.
the way. I just want to throw, it goes both ways of the street.
Oh no, I know. I said she's very clingy. He's very clingy.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's a very natural thing, but it's simply indicative of the fact that a lot of people don't believe they have interesting lives, or don't really have interesting lives, and so, or they're not really aware of their own lives, and they end up becoming like leech-like parasites on another person, because they totally abandon themselves and try to, it's almost like an absorption of this other person's experience. But yeah, I think it's simply important. It's important to have that, to have your own life, because you don't want to bring nothing to the table. You certainly don't want to be a bother or a nuisance in someone else's life. Um, Now, if you guys simply do enjoy each other and naturally end up chatting as much as you do on the phone or texting and all that, then fine, by all means. But if it's a situation where it's obviously that it's obvious that you're playing an interesting, new relationship game, then it's not very helpful. But for the most part, I can see the dangers in that, but I could also see I like to believe there's also some good there too, you know.
Well, I think it allows both partners to develop healthy pride. And, we talked about the difference between evil pride and healthy pride, because if you have a healthy pride in something that you yourself do, when you see somebody else engaged in something, so let's just say, for example, you have your guy playing video games and his wife walks by and says, "Oh, he's so obsessed with this video game and not talking to me right now," or whatever. If that wife has a healthy pride in something that she does, she's a little less aware of how much time her husband is playing video games, right? If she's really into her painting, if she's really into puzzles, if she's really into some kind of thing that gives her healthy pride, she can kind of turn a blind eye more to her hubby playing video games, because her hubby has his special interest and she has her special interest. Whereas if that's not cultivated in both individuals, then each individual becomes resentful when the other person is not paying enough attention to them.
Yes, I mean it's yeah, yeah. You got to be about something. You got to be about something besides the other person. It's simple, you know. If that and if such an imbalance exists, then you're right. There is a resentment. There is, why don't you spend more time with me and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with actually asking that question if it's a legitimate question, But sometimes, often the case, especially amongst the young, it's we often want to be totally enveloped by the other person, or we want to consume them. It's a very strange situation where it's the old romantic poetry and all these love songs that talk about just the epitome of
You are my everything. You are my moon. You are my
thank you.
sky.
And I can't breathe without you. It's like, yes, you can breathe without me, and it's a shame. It's a damn shame if you're a grown human being and cannot breathe without me. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, and I honestly think this idea that, like, I think relationships are formed by two cultivated individuals coming together, and they
right.
have to be cultivated individuals, because it's just for the reason that you described. If one of the individuals is not properly cultivated,
Yes.
then every single time that other individual, like, gets infatuated with one of their hobbies or one of their interests or something, they take it as a personal attack. Well, you're not interested in me anymore. You don't love me anymore. But if you have two healthy, integrated, and cultivated individuals coming together, you won't have that as much. Okay, you may have some other kind of alignment issues, and you do need to have a movie night, you do have to have a romantic restaurant night, you do have to do things together. This is absolutely fundamental. It can't just be like, hello there, Sally, nice to see you, what will be for dinner it can't just be like complete. It can't be two strangers just inhabiting the same space. Like, your wife is not your roommate. Like, that's just it. She's not just a roommate that just pays you rent every month or something. There is more to that relationship than that.
Right.
But I think that making a schedule or having rules upon, like, okay, I really like, I think even just saying like, okay, I really would like to dedicate some time to this right now. However, what about tomorrow, or what about later today? Like, because I think that when you say no, and here's the thing about anyone, and this goes for friends even, it's okay to say no, but also have like, that's not going to work. However, what about next week, or what about tomorrow, right? Because like, I think that shows maturity, and that shows that you still care about the person. Like, hey, I'm highly interested in this thing that I'm doing right now, but we can do it tomorrow. And then, if they accuse you, oh, you're only available when you're ready or whatever, it's like, okay, when are you ready? When are we both ready? Right. And splicing it out so that not one person is in control, but that you're coming together in a time that works well for both of you.
Yes, I think that does make a good amount of sense, um, and
Yeah.
the addition of not today but tomorrow. It's very helpful. It does, and it shows that you're interested, at least if you are in fact interested. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah.
Yeah, and vice versa. If tomorrow doesn't work, then you just keep throwing darts on the board until something sticks and something lands. Because it's not about, because like there is a valid criticism of like, well, it's only on your time, right? It's only when you're ready to do something that we do it or whatever. And okay, fair enough, I hear you. I'm like, well, when are you ready to do this? Let's make sure that we're properly aligned, and that if you are free, you're not just holding out to prove a point. You're holding out because you also have something else planned on that day. Kenny, thank you so much for setting these boundaries with me today.
No worries, my good man. Anytime.
This concludes the 146th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.